Sorry for the delay. Just trying to figure out how to proceed this morning in a way that's most useful to people and their time. So forgive me if it's we may take more breaks than we normally do, and you'll have to bear with us as we figure out how to go with the flow and what we hear. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing from quite a few people this morning on a number of items. So sorry. Good morning. And to many of you, welcome back. I'm Felicia Marcus, as many of you know, chair of the State Water Resources Control Board. With me are my fellow board members. To my left, Vice Chair Stephen Moore, who apparently did a rendition of the three main points yesterday that will stay in the ages or go down in the ages, but I have to watch the tape to see it because I wasn't able to be here. To his left, board member Didi Damo. To my right, board member Tam Dodak, and to her right, board member Joaquin Esquivel. Before we get to today's meeting, I want you to take a minute. For those of you who've been here a million times, I could say recite after me, although you probably can't recite after what Stephen said yesterday, and don't listen to that. Please pick look and see where the exit nearest you is, and if you hear an emergency sound, it's probably an emergency or a drill. Please gather your stuff and your friends and proceed carefully out of the building, down the stairs. If you can't use the stairs, someone will come and help guide you to a protected area, and there are areas on every floor that are fire rated for quite some time. We meet over in Cesar Chavez Park near 10th and J. If you want to wait with us for the all clear, that would be great. Also, please try to silence your noise-making devices. For some reason, it's been bedeviling me even if I put on Do Not Disturb, so I think I have it right, so my apologies if it buzzes through. Restrooms are out the door to my left and then down a hall. And I know someone told me where do we have overflow, folks? Or? Right here. On the mezzanine floor, and we have videos up there. Okay, terrific. I know someone emailed me that back, but I didn't get to check. Forgive me, this is the continuation of a hearing, so I need to go through perhaps more than folks might like, but I do think it's important to remind people of the reasons that we're here. We started this particular meeting on August 21st and 22nd and continued it to today. Our purpose is to consider adopting amendments to the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan that would update water quality objectives that address flows in the lower San Joaquin River for fish and wildlife beneficial uses and salinity levels in the Southern Delta for agricultural beneficial uses, as well as programs of implementation for these objectives. At the same time, we're considering adoption of the proposed final substitute environmental document, which is the environmental analysis that supports the proposed amendments. Substitute environmental document is a mouthful, so during this meeting, we'll refer to it as the SED. Many of you were here for the first 2 days of this particular meeting, and as well as the meetings we've had in the past. Thank you for your participation. Those were particularly good 2 days, and thanks for taking the time to join us again today. We heard a lot of thoughtful discussion, well, even more thoughtful than we had heard before, and a healthy exchange of information. And I hope that those who couldn't be here in person were able to follow on our webcast. If you missed it and you're interested in watching that meeting, both days are available from the homepage of the State Water Board's website. They're listed chronologically under the board link on the page titled Videos. If you have trouble finding them, our staff would be happy to provide you with the link. And we have staff up here. Do we have staff out in the hallway as well? In the overflow? Yes. If you have trouble finding somebody to talk to, just talk to Ms. Townsend and she'll find you someone. This meeting is being held in accordance with the public notice dated July 6, 2018, as revised on August 15th, 2018. That August 15th notice indicated that final action by the board on this item would be continued to a future board meeting. The board issued the notice after very careful consideration and in recognition of the complexity of the issues before us. We also hoped that the additional time would prove useful to the parties involved in discussions on voluntary agreements. The board recognized and still recognizes that voluntary agreements to improve ecological conditions can provide more durable solutions by bringing together other tools to the table, such as habitat restoration of many kinds. There's more than that. We look forward to hearing more about progress on voluntary agreements today. And most important, I want to emphasize that even if the board should act today, there are still good opportunities for voluntary agreements in the future. It is a part and parcel of the construct of the proposal. As you're no doubt aware by now, however, we received a letter late yesterday from the governor and the new governor-elect asking for more time to work on those settlements prior to action. We're going to need to consider this request in the course of today's work as my colleagues and I get the chance to discuss it and hear from the administration and stakeholders today, and we can only do it in a public meeting. So bear with us. As I've said before, this is our only chance to talk to more than one other board member. And on this particular topic, because it's a continuation, we need to discuss it, and we should discuss it together. But we're going to want to hear from the administration with a little more illumination, and we're going to want to hear from the stakeholders as well in terms of their thoughts on that request and what can be accomplished in that period of time before I think we consider what we ought to do. Since today is a continuation of the, well, sorry, let me move back. I'll make sure there are things I have to say versus just the things I want to say. Consideration of today's action also comes after significant public engagement, including multiple opportunities for written and oral comments. These included 5 earlier days of public hearing and a 6-month written comment period on the draft plan amendments and draft recirculated SED, and 2 days of oral comments and a 3-week written comment period on changes to the draft plan amendments as reflected in the proposed final plan amendments that we made available when the July 6th notice was released. Since today is a continuation of the August 21st and 22nd meeting days where all of the board members were present, it will not be helpful to repeat previous comments or to make new comments on the older documents. We're not accepting further written comments, and the oral comment period on the proposed final amendments closed at the end of the August 22nd, 2018 meeting. There are some things I know I need to say, but I am going to hold them until after we consider the request. Let me make sure I have everything said. Please be aware the meeting's being recorded, so it's also important to speak into the microphone. That, as many of you know from having been here before, that means be close enough for it to be picked up, but not so close that it picks up the peas with a pop, pretty much. Many of you have filled out the blue speaker cards. We appreciate that. I'm actually before we go to public comment, I'm going to give these back to the board secretary so that the clerk, so that you have a chance. These are public comments on the plan. I anticipate we will also have public comments on the request, and that it may not be as efficient to just go through every card we have here, or I'm just thinking on the fly, I could go through and then people could decide to come up if they want to comment on the request. Whatever. All right, let's see. It's one of those things I may have to take another break on. Okay. When we do get to those cards, I'll take them roughly in the order received, and the roughly is just sometimes people need to leave, particularly as the day goes on, but I take them roughly in the order received, which should help you have a sense of when you'll be called, and I'll call people 5 cards in advance so they have a sense of where they are. So I think what we'll do is we'll start at the request of the California Natural Resources Agency. We'll have a presentation from the Departments of Water Resources and Fish and Wildlife on the status of voluntary settlements and the request before us. We then have to consider that request, and I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to like to hear from the parties to those conversations and allow for some public comment here. After the public comment, board members will discuss any motion on the proposal further. I'll take a moment for board members after the request, but I anticipate that we will have some comments, we will hear from the public, and then we'll have discussion amongst ourselves. As I said, we may also take breaks to allow staff to develop language depending on the nature of our discussion and the ideas presented, either on the request or on eventual plan amendments. Should we decide to consider final action today, we'll also hear public comment, of course, on that final action, which will proceed in a similar manner. Sorry, that's a little disjointed, but that's basically how we'll handle it procedurally. But before we begin, I'd still like to say a few words about why we're here today, to remind people of that and acknowledge the concerns that are being expressed across a spectrum of people about whether what's proposed goes too far or doesn't go far enough. As I've said before, this is really hard. Anyone who comes and says that it's simple one way or the other clearly doesn't understand it and clearly doesn't understand the legitimate concerns that have brought us here on all sides. The Delta is important to all of us, and the whole watershed is, and science has shown for far too long that the Delta is in an ecological crisis. Addressing this crisis means changes to how we manage water, and we have to figure out how to be more precise in managing water for the ecosystem, for farms, and for communities, and how to make each drop count for as much as we possibly can for multiple societal interests. We also have to figure out how to do it together in a transparent and more collaborative way, which may be even harder than the science. Today isn't about detailing exactly how we get there, but it's about moving that ball forward. Coming to a decision has been far too many years in the making, and while it's an important step to getting the Delta ecosystem on a path to recovery, it's still just the beginning. If the board decides to act today, we'll establish a framework with many opportunities during implementation to refine the action and work together. I know this is not how it's been framed by others, but it has always been our intent. If we don't act today, we will reconvene in approximately 30 days with the same mission and the same determination and potentially a little further ahead. We're in a new era where we can't fight for 10 or 20 years over a static plan on paper that sets rules by calendar and then walk away for another 10 or 20. We need to have a new framework for constant engagement and evolving work using newer tools and technology, along with a healthier dose of transparency and real rewards for collaboration. I also want to emphasize that the proposal before us to begin with represents a compromise. In 2009, the legislature passed the Delta Reform Act, which required the board to conduct a public process to identify the flows that would be necessary in the Delta ecosystem if fishery protection was the sole purpose for which the waters were used. Specifically, that report suggests 60% unimpaired San Joaquin River inflow from February through June. We've acknowledged that the Delta Flow Criteria Report only represents one of many factors that we need to balance. In considering potential changes to the Bay Delta objectives, we must take into account past, present, and probable future beneficial uses of water, economics, and other considerations. That's part of what makes it so hard. The comments and concerns you've raised are really valuable parts of the balancing process, and it was important to hear from as many of you as possible. And to help make that possible, we had numerous public meetings and provided several lengthy public comment opportunities, including, as noted above, a historic 6-month period for written comments, the longest in the state board's history. We've heard heartfelt concerns about the potential impacts of these changes on the individual people, farms, businesses, and communities of California, and we acknowledge those concerns. We heard equally heartfelt concerns about the potential impacts of not acting on the rivers and the Delta, on fisheries, on Native American lifeways, on the livelihoods of fishermen and fisherwomen, on our recreational economy, and on the threat of draconian regulatory restrictions on water diversion in response to endangered species issues. We also acknowledge those concerns, and they drive us as well. They're all valid. This is just hard. And it requires a sturdy constitution and a healthy dose of empathy for people and for nature, as well as the creativity to navigate it. And that's the ball we need to keep our eye on as we move forward. Now I think I want to turn to the representatives from the Natural Resources Agency to start. And again, forgive me if I stop and start and have different breaks, because It has been things are moving in interesting and different ways, and so just trying to adapt, take it in, and consider it all fairly. Thank you for coming. Thank you for your efforts over time, and eager to hear how you believe it's going.
Good morning. It's true. My name's Chuck Bonham, and I'm the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife.
That is true.
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 I suppose this morning all eyes are on us. I'm going to use simple language. I want to cut through the noise. I'm going to go slow, and I will be deliberate, because in this situation, words really matter. This is it. No more time beyond the next 35 days. The chair referenced a letter. I would like to read from that letter so that all the eyes on us understand something that has happened and is pretty remarkable. Yesterday, Chair Marcus, you received a letter from Governor Brown and our now Governor-elect Newsom. Among other things, it says, quote, "We respectfully request a postponement of this item until December 12th, 2018. Second, it says, "During this time, we pledge to actively and meaningfully engage to bring this vital matter to a successful closure." Third, it says, "We agree that the need to improve our aquatic ecosystems is urgent. A lasting and well thought out solution will benefit all Californians and our environment." As the director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife this morning, I ask you for this limited continuance. It's the right thing to do. Those three parts of this letter are amazing. It asks for a limited continuance until December 12th. I'm authorized to testify before you this morning that the Brown administration will not seek another delay. Second, the governor and governor-elect are the right leaders at the right time in the most amazing state in the United States of America. They are bold. They know how to complete bold things.
Oh, I thought you said old. I knew that had to be wrong. Sorry.
Going slow and deliberate.
Sorry.
Because words matter.
They are bold, yes. Thank you. To boldly go.
They do amazing things. In their letter to you, they've given you a personal pledge about their engagement in the next 35 days. Third, the governor and the governor-elect agree with the need to improve our aquatic ecosystems, and that is an urgent need. Let me anticipate a couple questions. Maybe you're skeptical. Maybe some of us are cynical. I've been around this rodeo a long time, like you. I was here on August 22nd. One of you may be getting ready to ask me, what's changed? I think three things have changed. In the last 2 months, since you gave us additional time, in my professional judgment, we've made more progress than in the prior 2 years combined. You have to take me at my word. I know that's a leap of faith, and it relies on trust. Second, this letter. It speaks for itself, as do my comments a moment ago. Third, the Brown administration will not seek another delay. Are these issues easy? Absolutely not. Let me end with a few thoughts that are just from my heart, and then ask Director Namath to correct any errors. It's okay to care about agriculture in our rural communities. It's okay to care about salmon, rivers, and the environment. In fact, I've dedicated my entire professional career to that. Of course, water is essential to these values. It's okay to reach across historical divides and forge solutions. And I think me being here today puts at risk some friendships I count on dearly in the environmental community, but I understand that. It's also okay to give in order to get. Compromise makes the world go round, especially in our infamous water wars. You have incredibly hard jobs. You're an independent board. Your charge is to figure out the wise, balanced, beneficial use of water. It's vital to all, fought for by many, including me. This is profoundly serious business. I trust in your process. I trust in your judgment today. It's your decision. Chair Marcus, I realize the difficulty you face providing over this fractious argument and these polarized positions. And the most important part of my heart, I wish many people had not said the things they've said about you in an ad hominem way.
Comes with the territory.
So thank you for your service. The time is right now. A further limited continuance will greatly assist us in getting this done. That's my request to you as Director of the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And with that, let me pause.
Good morning, Chairwoman Marcus and members of the board. My name is Carla Namath. I'm the Director of the Department of Water Resources. And in all seriousness, I think you can probably see why Chuck is a good person to follow, but he's also a tough act to follow. So I want to associate myself with his comments directly, particularly his expressions of empathy. And in that sense, I also want to acknowledge your opening comments, Chairwoman, about the complexity of the issues, the difficulty of the issues, and the legitimacy of all the interests that have been expressing what they believe to be the best outcome for California, for communities, economies, and the environment for many years now on this topic. So it is not without great deliberation that I too appear before you today to seek this very limited continuance of the Phase 1 proceeding. As director, I have been engaged primarily in discussions with staff at the Department of Water Resources since the Water Board put out its Phase 2 framework in July, which was a very important document to help motivate the department to start developing potential solutions for environmental improvements in the Delta estuary. In a limited way over the course of the last several weeks, I've begun to engage in discussions with the water users that represent the water rights holders in the Phase 2 watersheds and tributaries. And I think we have an opportunity to do something generational in how we manage water in California and how we manage that water comprehensively across the Bay Delta watershed. And that is to build upon the good work that DFW and I had been engaged in my former capacity at the California Natural Resources Agency to develop tributary agreements, in-stream flow improvements, and physical restoration projects across essentially 9 different tributaries to the Delta. And we have an opportunity to align the improvements we seek in those tributaries with improvements that we seek down in the Delta estuary. Align in terms of volume, timing, availability of freshwater flows, together with physical restoration that spans essentially the estuary all the way up into these critical watersheds. And that's an outcome that for me is very, very exciting. It enables us to address the issues that have so deeply challenged native species in California, our native fisheries, salmon, and other fish species down in the Delta, in a comprehensive way that acknowledges the extent of their habitat. And that will ultimately enable us to make better investments, make better use of our investments in water, make better use of our investments in habitat restoration because of an ability to approach it in this comprehensive way. And so for that reason, I think there is a level of coordination among parties we seek to settle with in the San Joaquin tributaries with approaches that we may take in Phase 2. And it is our intention to be able to describe that in a much greater level of detail within the next 34 days. And the opportunity that that presents and the commitment expressed by Governor Brown and our newly governor-elect Newsom has the potential for an historic moment. And I can commit to you today that I will continue my effort, roll up my sleeves over the course of the next several weeks to see if we can bring this to closure. So thank you.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I appreciate you directly coming out and saying you won't ask for another request, because obviously we've had many requests in the past, and I appreciate your comments on what may be different. What can you say to folks who have not been in these rooms, including us, to give us hope? We've had hope of it, but that another 30 days will at least bring more, even though you can't bring us into the room, because we have to decide if it's comparable at some point to our regulation, or we would have to figure out how to create an open door for whatever progress you can make. There are folks who have not been in that room, and because of the confidentiality agreements you have, which I understand in some deals are important to get people to a certain place, and I imagine we will hear that, you have a lot of skepticism on the part of people who really don't know what's going on in there. And I think one of the questions that will come to mind is, how will more people, even if it's not the 5 of us, how will more people, including some of our staff who've worked long and hard and have a tremendous amount of expertise and others, have a vista on what it is that you're doing in the next 30 days?
If 3 immediate responses to your question. First, my expectation is that speakers and public comment after the two directors will confirm their commitment to getting this done in the next 35 days. If that's how public comments play out, primarily from those districts in the San Joaquin Valley, I think that's an important moment. Second, I trust your process. You have subsequent process. When we come back in 35 days with a package, we will be expected to prove comparability. We will be expected to show you the framework that illustrates the combination of restoration, base flows, pulse flows, creative revenue structures, landscape scale changing activities from basically Redding to almost Fresno will be equal or better than a point along a continuum of percent of unimpaired flow. If I fail in that case before you, don't accept it. Third, no more delay.
Thank you. But my question goes to engagement of folks in your discussions. You've spent a lot of time in discussion, but not with as broad a group of people. So you're going to have skepticism even from people who want you to succeed, like us, who just don't know what's in the black box.
Which is why I think my second point is perhaps most important. You have subsequent important public process. The content of whatever is developed should be judged through your public process when we prove comparability or not. We lay out the science. And each party should retain their right to give you their opinion on that package when we put it in front of you.
I guess my question has to go with opening the door to the discussions, what your plan is.
Chairwoman, I would respond in this way, a couple of things. I think referencing our comments about the complexity of the issues we're trying to resolve, the complexity of water users that that would be involved in a settlement is addressing that complexity is no small task, particularly as it relates to processes of engagement. And the department will continue to be a focal point for water users to work with one another and work with me to make sure that as we develop solutions, we're generating buy-in across the water user community.
All right.
That said, I also think that one of the important statements in the letter from Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom is their consideration for the urgent need to develop a plan that can provide improvements to the environment as quickly as possible. Given that that's one of their objectives and that they are willing to commit the time and energy to see this effort to conclusion, I would expect that Governor Brown certainly will be asking his two appointees the disposition of the environmental community that is very engaged, and no community is a monolith, so I think there's various degrees of skepticism around whether or not we can put something together that is going to meet expectations. But I am convinced that Governor Brown will be seeking the counsel from his two appointees about engaging with the environmental community, and he will want to understand the breadth of the opinions of that community.
I would take that a step further.
That's kind of the question I'm asking.
Understood. I would take that a step further. To get to where we are today has been shaped by input from the water community as well as input from the environmental and conservation community. It's been a discussion over approximately 2 years where many of our leading, most constructive, thoughtful organizations have weighed in on possible solutions and details. And I don't see that changing, which is very consistent with the director's comment a moment ago. I would also argue that in my experience in 8 years, Governor Brown knows how to take input across all sectors of California to then help think through what's the wisest, best outcome for all Californians. And I would expect he continues to do that here, including seeking input directly from conservation organizations.
Let me turn to, before we go to comments, I want to turn to any questions that my colleagues may have. Questions? Questions? Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate your articulation of how momentous it is to have the governor, the sitting governor, and the governor-elect weigh in into this process, and the words that were used, and so that sets, I think, upon us all in a positive way, because it really validates all of our staff's efforts, the efforts of folks working on this vexing problem, and everyone's commitment to finding paths forward that meet multiple objectives. I had the chance to talk with the governor last night for some 20 minutes or longer, and so I know there's a genuineness to his commitment to be personally engaged. That's what he assured me. But the governor-elect has a lot on his plate. There are a lot of things that he needs to do in the next month to do his job as the future governor. How would you answer the skepticism that of the level of his engagement, given all that's on his plate?
I can't speak for the governor-elect. I wouldn't presume to. I stand by my earlier comments that I personally think both he and the current governor are bold leaders who get amazing things done. You have a written testament from them that they will be engaged. I also think from a broader perspective, as to a matter of good government, there should be good coordination and seamless transition. And this is an issue of such importance to so many parts of California, I would put it in the ledger as particular careful attention to good coordination and good transition. The way I judged the letter they submitted to you last night is, give us a limited continuance. We're going to work like crazy to get this done.
And I would also share that he assured me personally that he would recognize the importance of a water budget for the environment in these discussions. And I'm here as a witness to our discussion. And that's what I'll be looking for in whatever comes out in these voluntary settlements. But you mentioned in-stream flows, and that's a form of that. So good. I'll look forward to more discussion.
Yeah, no, we'll probably have to have quite a bit. Yeah, please.
I just want to start by thanking both Governor Brown and Governor-elect for sending the letter and for the commitment that you, Director Bonham, outlined. I, for one, am very excited about the possibilities that this may provide. And so I'm really struck by something that you said, Director Bonham, that you've got to give in order to get, and would just be interested in your comments to help us make that determination, in that we too, not just the parties that you're working with, but we too, I think, could look at this in terms of giving in order to get. We are, at this point, prepared to have action on the plan today, unless a determination is made to postpone the decision. So maybe you could help refresh us with respect to some of the things that you talked about when you were here last, as far as the potential for us to get more than what we have in the current proposal with these voluntary agreements,
I'll try.
without getting into the specifics.
I'll try. August 22nd is on tape, so that's probably the best record of what I previously said. What gets me excited is a system-wide outcome. An outcome that's not divided into phases that marches through a lengthy proceeding. What has me interested and excited is immediate implementable results out in the field for the benefit of fish and wildlife that our rural and working landscape communities can also embrace. So in my head, what I see is literally a map that has hundreds of identified restoration projects from Redding almost to Fresno in each of the 3 to 9, 10 major tributaries to our Mammoth, Sacramento, and San Joaquin rivers, including a clear description of restoration commitments, at least in the northern delta, if not across more of the delta landscape. Those would be projects which are well vetted, well understood, and universally, mostly adopted as the right thing to do. I also see in a future outcome something unprecedented, which Director Namath is trying to produce. A structure that allows us to know there'll be a funding commitment to complete that kind of massive restoration promptly. It's not just a promise to do it. It's an actual schedule with revenue behind it. Then you take that aspect, which alone would be amazing, and you build it in with a flow regime. In my view, in each tributary, including the Sacramento main stem, the McCollum is an example, the Stanislaus is the example, the Yuba, needs some form of flow schedule that all parties can look to. It produces certainty, it produces operational reliability, but it should also produce an understanding in the environmental community it will be sufficient for managing the life cycle needs of the salmon and other native fish. And then I would argue, as I did on August 22nd, you add to that base flow very specific use of volumes of water at certain times of year, get us back what we've largely lost. The thing we've lost in the Central Valley is a habitat type, which is the relationship right at the river and the floodplain. We used to have fish go up on that thing and eat bugs and get so fat, dumb, and happy. When they swam out to the ocean, more of them would come back. We've largely lost that. So the third aspect we're arguing and negotiating for, and I think it's warmly embraced, is the use of water for a real functional outcome. Inundation of floodplain, to get salmon up there, to grow them larger. It takes water. But I think if you step back, give us 35 days, we can emerge with a schedule, a framework, a possible revenue structure, top to bottom, for that kind of restoration, those kinds of base flows, combined with that kind of significant, and this is where there'll need to be a give for a get, significant commitments of water to activate floodplain. And in my judgment, your process is the defense for your skepticism, because I will have to bring that with the willing parties and prove it's comparable to the benefits from a specific percent unimpaired flow. We should have that debate. Sorry, your turn.
And oh, go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
If
please.
I can,
Please.
you know, what I'm sort of challenged in some of that, though, is regrettably the misinformation around the board's proposal. Because if you're going to bridge the, quantified benefits there, then there has to be some acknowledgement that the board's work and the proposal is not junk science, is not flawed fundamentally, but there can be disagreements, certainly. But as I understand the board's proposal, it is based on habitat activation, as the watersheds currently exist. So to the extent, and I think it's an important point you made, that you can get the millions of dollars of restoration, of changing what that watershed looks like, where that habitat gets activated, you can perhaps have a different flow regime than the one that's been analyzed by the state board and its staff. So I think that is what is exciting, is that there's a potential to be additive. But again, I have grave concern that the public discourse around how we find ourselves here before this vote, it's a challenge, and Godspeed. And so I know it's not an easy one. And we talk about the complexity of water rights and having to go through those. And this board understands those. This staff does, insofar as we have to administer the water rights and the rest of the watersheds as well in this state. And so, I find myself with, concerned about how we engage then other watersheds that are just as critical, that are having the same sort of discussion about how we best account for ecosystem needs, how we work collaboratively with landowners and other water users in ways that minimizes what are obvious conflicts. And to the extent that this is an opportunity for a generational shift, as someone who feels strongly it is from a different generation, I think we're
I'm going to call you
hungry.
the show off again, like I always do when you do that.
Sorry to my other board members, but I think there is a thirst and desire to have that generational shift, to be able to move past what is the easy politicization of these discussions and get to something meaningful that brings certainty and realizes, and folks can hopefully realize they don't have to be so afraid, even though they're being told that they should be.
Board member, I share your thinking about misinformation, and it's up there with me for the regret on some of the commentary that's been lobbed at you individually as board members. As an example, it's just not correct to suggest the state's uninterested in predator control or other physical habitat restoration. I expect those to be cornerstone elements of the product we bring you in 35 days. So my hope is in subsequent comments, you'll hear enough from our important water community to validate this commitment to get it done in 35 days.
Thank you. I thought of something to say after all. Thank you, both directors, for your commitment to this effort, for your investment of time, energy, personal sacrifices. I can relate, Director Bonham. I used to have friends in the ag community. I hope I still do, but we will see. And Director Namath, I remember a conversation we had, I guess almost a year now, where I expressed my very strong support for these agreements and my very strong support for your efforts in your former role and now continuing as Director of DWR on these things, seeing it as a true solution to get the results that we all want to achieve for the benefit of all Californians. So thank you for your continuing commitment to that. And I really appreciate the Director's earlier comment today about words matter, words do matter, and I am very appreciative of the letter that we received last night. I have perused it very carefully, paying attention to the words, and there's a lot in it that really warmed my heart and make me feel very confident in the process going forward. And hearing your comments earlier today, Director Bonham, also was very helpful. I was especially impressed by the number of times you repeatedly say, trust in our, meaning the board's public process. And I know that you know that part of the proposal, as the chair pointed out earlier, of the Water Quality Control Plan update is the process for considering any voluntary settlement agreements that may come after the board act, should we act on this matter, and the consideration and incorporation as appropriate of those VSAs into any future amendment. That is part of the public process in which you have voiced your trust. So my question to you is, should the board decide to act on what is proposed before us today, does your trust in our public process remain?
My answer is, it is up to you as a board what you will do today.
I'm not asking for your suggestion or your advice. I'm asking, as the director, I'm asking your opinion because you've said you trust in our process. You've advised us to trust our own process in considering any VSA that may be brought to us 30 days from now. So should we act today? Do you still have faith in our public process?
I believe in California. I believe in its public servants. I request a postponement for 35 days.
In other words, you decline to answer. Thank you.
May I, Chair?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe I could prompt you to answer it in a different way, not necessarily on the issue of trust, but one of the things that I thought in my question that you might bring up, and your answer, your response was very helpful on you give to get, potentially something way more, and you talked quite a bit about restoration. But one of the things that you didn't mention, and maybe you could talk a little bit about timing of actually getting projects on the ground and in-stream flows in the river under a VSA process as opposed to our process.
Thank you. Yeah, that is one of the, I believe, key benefits, and I think we share that the need is urgent. So we do need to have a voluntary agreement that enables us to implement right away. I think that the work that we're doing now, if we come to a conclusion, a successful conclusion by the middle of December, I know that there is additional work that the board needs to do, particularly with its phase 2 documentation. But my hope would be that we would bring something to this board in December that has enough detail and enough support across the water user community, north of the Delta, south of the Delta, east of the Delta, also with environmental groups, that would enable you all to embrace that framework and continue your process in a way that enables the parties to do a significant amount of pre-work, if you will. There will be a lot of details to continue to sort out to make it actionable and enforceable and all of those things. But for some of the ideas that we're contemplating, I think there would be significant need to start working early in the part of next year to enable us to establish funding mechanisms to put us in a position to start implementing after the board completed its process, which I believe in our last discussion with staff, the timing for that was potentially July of 2019. Therefore, we would be in a position to start implementing in the last half of 2019.
So to confirm my view, I would be negotiating with the expectation we're improving stream flows by the time we get to end of 2019, certainly at some point in 2020. Whether we may need to phase into that over time, I do think a benefit is that kind of immediate improvement compared to inevitably what would happen otherwise, contentious litigation and more administrative procedures.
No,
Thank you. I appreciate the discussion very much. As I was listening to how you see this unfolding, and I want to acknowledge all the benefits that you articulated. They are exciting. You know, the idea of alignment, connectivity of tributaries, it's part of what we've been trying to encourage. But just from a process standpoint, one of the points of discussion you're going to hear us have today, and we'll be talking with stakeholders about, is how then the VSAs would fold into our process and what modifications, if any, would be needed to the water quality control plan. And a board item, you know, an agenda item before the state board that would have the package of commitments, the financing somewhat fleshed out, and the actual language changes recommended to the water quality control plan that will comport with the settlement agreements that have been made. So that will be part of that process.
And also meet Porter Cologne.
Yes,
Clean water,
exactly.
et cetera.
And so, you know, in terms of scheduling and your vision of when that might happen, you know, as far as when you could come to the board and achieve those goals in the latter part of 2019.
Yes. So my quick thought would be, first, we will come back in 35 days or less. I do think a framework is the right word choice, with sufficient details across all the major operable terms. There would be a need for subsequent, you know, procedure in front of you. We've discussed that. Second, my expectation is you could finish that as you move through the first part of 2019, perhaps by the middle part of 2019. Third, this allows me to come back to Ms. Doduk and say, look, I get you want me to ask, you want me to answer a question based on the premise you will approve today. All I'm saying is you will either act and approve, or potentially you could take delay. Whatever you do, I'll adapt to that and keep at the effort to produce the right outcome for California. But I am telling you in direct terms, I'm asking for a continuance.
And maybe I should take a break before I ask this question so that I get the wording right. I'm not as good as you are at word choice. Do you envision coming, whatever you do, envision coming back? It's been a Herculean effort, and there are more people to bring into this party, so to speak, such as it is. And frequently you spend the most time in the beginning with folks who have the most trouble with something, and I do think both, it does feel to those on the outside that the needs of fish and wildlife, despite all the great, I know where your heart is, Director Bonham, that it comes second because they don't scream as loud or there aren't as many of them, et cetera. So we're gonna hear some real concerns. And there's also a need to update this water quality control plan. And I know there are people out there who want it to just go away and have an agreement instead for a lot of stuff. We have to update this plan, and there has to be a regulatory frame, whatever word you need to use. And what we've tried to propose is a regulatory frame that we think works and allows for voluntary settlements. Do you envision, and we're open to this, coming with amendments to that regulatory frame, all of which would take time to consider, notice and comment, we do things out in the open, or with a voluntary settlement that would meet, hopefully would meet what we've laid out, or maybe be outside the constraints, but be so cool that we want to consider a process to re-up through our, I hate using the word process because it sounds like we're just into the process, but this is a process that we've all engaged in over the decades, and there were some who wish it didn't exist. But the fact that it does may be a big part, in addition to your efforts, to why we're where we are today. But I want your assurance that when you come back, if we do give this continuance, that you will not be asking us to set aside a regulatory framework whether ours or ours with some adjustment, or ask us to move on and consider something while we have what we're suggesting in place, so that there is an update to the water quality control plan and not endless delay. Because I know you'll hear from people, and you mentioned skepticism, that this, not that the governor and the governor-elect are insincere. They are. It's awesome to have them asked to do this, and it is awesome if we can get the prodigious energy, particularly of this governor. The incoming governor is going to have a lot of other things on his plate to focus on these issues on behalf of furthering the needs to balance the environment as well as other water uses in a more intelligent way. But there are some who I think are hoping that our process will go away. I think that's getting a bit to what maybe a different form of what Board Member Dodek was asking, and I just want your assurance that that is not what you're going to negotiate and come back to us on. No regulatory framework, or just postpone, a regulatory framework that can serve as an important assurance, or I know people hate the word backstop, I'm happy to call it anything else, but that is the guts of what we're about, and we've been trying to craft one that has an opening for all these good things because it's what we really want, but it can't just go away. Yes. So it is, I think, important for people out there to hear what it is you have in mind, even if it's not fully baked, and frankly, your commitment to that, as opposed to what some people I know want, which is that it just goes away, which puts us in an impossible position.
Here's my personal commitment to you. I think you should update the plan. It's long overdue. And I hope in 35 days we bring you a framework that is complementary to your work product, but establishes the package approach is a better way to go. I'm not yet clear in my own mind some of the inevitable hurdles and discussions that will emerge between now and 35 days from now on some of those technical important details. The last thing I'll say is the letter you received last night from the governor and the governor-elect says, for many months, state agencies, water districts, and others have been working hard to achieve voluntary agreements that would meet the requirements of the amendment set for adoption.
All right, here's my suggestion. I do think complex matters, particularly ones that come up, require a little bit of thought and breaks. I am going to, I hate to do this to you, Janine, I'm going to give this pile back to you, and we're going to take a 15-minute break, and there's a good cafe downstairs. People should get sustenance, coffee, liquid, whatever you need for a little while. Let Ms. Townsend know by noting on your card if you want to, we'll pull them out if you want to talk about this issue first, or want your cards reserved for if we choose to act or consider action on the proposal, just so that I'm not calling a lot of names. And then we'll come back and hear from all of you, and then I'm sure we'll have more questions. And what I'm hoping to hear is something a little different from what we've heard all along. And again, I'm a lawyer, a combatant, probably settled more deals than anybody I know in different arenas, and it's odd to not, it's odd to not be in that room for me, because usually I'm the one who's being the border collie doing it. But I do know that there are contexts in which people feel they need to say certain things, particularly at a microphone. But we have had a tremendous amount of hyperbole, I would say, and inaccuracy about what we've proposed. And I will be interested in hearing true commitment to settlement and to improving fish and wildlife and the goals we have, rather than, I think, some of the perhaps understandable but not as helpful posturing that we've seen. And I'd say that on all sides. But I really am looking to hear what people pledge or hope to accomplish if they're for this, and what they're concerned about if they're against it. And then we'll probably take another break, because I'm going to need to really be able to just listen and consider it. This is a very unusual setting. I know, I'll just say it right now, I know for many, it did for me at first, that have been in the world, it plays into the narrative of previous water board attempts to actually do its job when they weren't able to do that. I think we're at a different place, but I think people need to be mindful that that is the fear and the worry that people have. I do think this may be different, but I want to hear where people are, because I think there are many legitimate ways folks can argue what we should or should not do today and what will lead to the solution we seek. But I do think we need to have a very healthy dose of respect, not just for the request we've gotten, but the manner in which we've gotten it, as well as the assurance this will be the last time. But I would be lying if I didn't say I had concerns about it, maybe because I have been around too long. And I think we really do need to spend some time with this to really be talking about what we're talking about now. And we may need, more assurances than people may think we need, considering the extraordinary offer in a way that we've gotten. But bear with us as we listen to all of you, because that will be important in us making our decision. So let's take a 15-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you. You turn the, it's on now? Okay, great. Sorry for the delay. I hope those were all productive conversations, that you've made incredible breakthroughs that you can share with us when you come up. A reminder, I'm a backbencher myself in rooms, but you're supposed to be in a seat in case the fire marshal comes in. They don't like that. I apologize because I like doing that myself. All right. I think I haven't gone through to see how many. I have the cards of people who have indicated it. I know at least a couple of elected officials that haven't marked their card, but they're not back in the room yet. I want to get to we always ask for them first. So I'll just do my best going through the list as it comes in. Let me just look for a second. And I've kept it in order, so if we go to consideration today, you'll still be in the same order. And we don't have as many, so. Hi. Assemblyman, I was just asking, you didn't mark your card on the continuance, but would you like to speak on the continuance, or you want to wait for the proposal? Okay, please come.
Madam Chair?
Yeah.
It was my
Oh, I
understanding
forgot.
that-
I need a motion. Sorry, this is all different. I need a motion. I don't need a second, but it would be better to have a motion that you are then speaking to the motion. So do I have a motion?
Yes, I would, in light of the letter that we received from Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom and the commitments that we've received today from Directors Bonham and Nemeth, I would move that the board postpone consideration of this item to our regularly scheduled December 11th meeting.
Oh, thank you. You got the date right. Good. Thank you. All right. Hi.
Good morning, Chairman Marcus.
Good morning,
Board
Assemblyman.
members. Thank you for the opportunity to address the topic before you this morning of a continuance. I think, frankly, it's an incredible development to have both the governor and the governor-elect engaged in this important process, seeking to pull parties together and find an outcome that is plus-plus. You know, they're certainly from my point of view, and I've been before this board many times to discuss this issue, moving forward with the current plan puts everybody in a position to lose. Extension, more time to discuss, negotiate, look at something that can address topics, frankly, beyond even the authority of this board, is only a potential for gain on all sides. And certainly would encourage the board to heed those encouragement from the governor and the governor-elect. I've worked closely with both parties. Certainly this governor's delivered some pretty incredible advances for California, bringing people together, and I've seen him get engaged one-on-one. He's certainly been engaged one-on-one with not just myself, but constituents in my district and important stakeholders in this discussion. So encouraged that decision today. Again, I think we all have something to gain by giving ourselves more time to work out the details. Thank you.
Thank you. And will you set the time at 3 minutes on this? Because in case we, okay. Supervisor Olson was here. I don't know if she wants to speak about this. Do you? I just know you two have been so involved. I don't want to just.
The supervisor was here representing the county. Unfortunately, she had to leave to another meeting, but also wanted to echo the comments I shared of supporting a continuance and more time for negotiation.
Great. All right, Mr. John Buckley from the Central Sierra Environmental Resource Center.
Good morning, John Buckley with SWRCB. So after so many years of this process, as has been shared earlier today, this board has provided an incredible amount of opportunity for input and feedback. It's put out very clearly what was proposed, and the proposals that before you is very clear. And yet today, because we have two agency representatives who I strongly respect, because they've asked for delay, now you're being asked for delay after all these years for 35 more days. And the concern I have is that delay has been a priority strategy for plan opponents throughout this entire process. It's been very clear, and whatever your particular priority, if you don't like the plan, delay has been one logical approach. So my concern is if this matter is delayed, is it truly likely to result in water interests making more progress at the voluntary agreement discussions? Or is it simply going to be providing more political momentum that will make you feel it's necessary to accept whatever voluntary agreements come forward, even if they're very rough as a framework, and don't provide the specificity and the details that actually allows you to know whether they're comparable to what you now have on the table? So our center has had a long history of decades of working and achieving middle ground collaborative solutions, and that would be our desire in this. If there's a way to meet the ag interests, if there's a way to meet the water interests, wildlife interests, that's great. The challenge I have, and why I am actually not supporting your delaying for 35 days, is I fear that instead of it coming to a better outcome, it simply will provide opportunity for more lobbying and opportunities for more pressure to not accept the plan that's now on the table, and to instead accept more non-flow measures that are more palatable to interests that are strongly entrenched. What I would suggest is that if you do decide to delay action, that you make it very clear that the framework that comes back before you must be specific enough and detailed enough so that at that meeting, rather than delaying months into the new year, you'll be able to judge whether or not it does or does not meet the requirements that you believe are necessary to be compatible with your scientific evidence and with all of the middle ground balance that you've attempted to put into this plan. So I do not oppose a beneficial outcome if that's possible, but coming back with something that's crude and very rough and framework that doesn't provide you that specificity, I would hope you would not accept. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, Nick Bloom, Modesto Irrigation District Board President.
Thank you for considering this. I just wanted to basically point out that we have been working on this for a number of years. The districts have been very productive, I think, in trying to negotiate with the directors and with the people that were in the room. We did feel that there was a lot of times we were basically negotiating with ourselves. But I do believe that if we do have a postponement, this will put a finite date on whether we can come to an agreement. Now, I hope and I pray that we do come to an agreement that is amicable for everyone. There is that cynical side of me that doesn't think that will happen in 32 days or whatever it is we're talking about. However, I do believe that with that finite date, with the governor and the governor-elect's signatures on the bottom of that letter, that they are, and hopefully they will be, engaged with us trying to come up with an agreement that is palatable for everyone. We heard Mr. Bonham say that, we need to get some floodplain areas. Well, yeah, if we do river restorations, we can make those things happen. And at MID and TID, we've had the science, we've done the studies, we know our river, we know where and how we can make these floodplain areas available for the fish. We're probably the most studied river in the nation, and so we know how to do these things. The problem is we haven't had a whole lot of people listening to what our science shows. Now, I'm not bashing your staff's science, but
The two-way street sort of on that.
Exactly. And the thing is we've never been able to sit in a room and discuss our science, improve our science, and with an honest listen. And I think that's necessary. And I think if we do have the governor and the governor-elect involved in this situation, you'll have someone with a little bit more clout that can basically say, look, I agree. This is proven science. I mean, our science is on our river. Now, I'm not going to say anything about the other rivers, but our river, we know it, and we know how to get more fish. We know how to run that river so that we can have enough water for not only the urban but also the farm areas. We know what we're doing. We've been doing it for 100 years, and if you look at the fish numbers we have this year, we haven't changed the way that we run the river, and the fish numbers this year are on track for a record number of fish coming back into our river. So it's not just the water, and that's why we have our science to prove that, and that's why I would encourage a delay, and hopefully this does come out, because nobody wants to see this in court for the next 10 years. We would all like to see some shovels in the ground, get the fish population back to where it should be, could be, and allow the urban and the farm communities to retain the water that they're using. Thank you.
Sorry, I was going to do these in fives. This way you don't have the chance to know what's coming up next. I'm sorry. Doug Obiji from NRDC, followed by Chris Schutz from the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, followed by Michael Carlin from the San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. Hi.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members, staff, colleagues, and friends. My name is Doug Obiji. I'm an attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I've spent the last 10 years of my career working on this plan amendment, as have most everyone else who's in this room. And I'm here today to urge you to oppose delaying this decision yet again after 10 years of public process, and particularly to oppose delaying a decision in a public forum to defer negotiations to a private backroom deal. We are open to voluntary settlements that will achieve the salmon doubling objective that has been in the plan since 1995, and that this plan amendment is required to achieve. And we agree that a mix of flow and non-flow measures can help achieve that objective, particularly things like floodplain habitat restoration. But in our view, the board taking action is a necessary prerequisite to an effective and durable settlement. When we look around what has happened in the West, and particularly in California, virtually all of the major settlements have come as a result of a board or commission taking action, a court ordering action, and the parties coming together to find out how best to implement and achieve those objectives. And we think that an essential part of that is not just funding for habitat restoration and increased flows, but also funding for improvements in water management to reduce and avoid the water supply impacts that occur. Now, I don't know what's in the voluntary settlement negotiations that the state has been conducting with certain parties, because we refuse to sign a confidentiality agreement, because we believe that these kind of negotiations need to be conducted in public and transparently. But I would ask you to ask Chuck and others who have been participating a couple of questions based on what he's presented and others have presented publicly. And the first is whether that negotiation is intended to actually achieve the salmon doubling objective. The state has previously been talking about a much lower objective that forestalls or gives up on restoring our salmon runs and the thousands of jobs that depend on them. The second is that the state seems to be relying on a model for floodplain inundation that's never been peer reviewed and really was never intended to actually evaluate the effects of flow on salmon in these negotiations. And I think better understanding those tools and your responsibilities under the Health and Safety Code are important. And finally, from our perspective, after 10 years of process and studies in these rivers as well as throughout the West, I would love to see a settlement that required less flow than what is needed, than what is proposed in the board's proposal. But I've never seen any credible science that would suggest that that's a possibility in terms of achieving the doubling objective. And for those reasons, I urge you to vote to approve the plan today. Let the parties continue to negotiate as they have the ability to do so for months, and let the parties continue to do so. And if they have a voluntary settlement that will achieve the doubling objective, bring it back and let all of us evaluate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schutz? who'll be followed by Mr. Carlin, and then followed by Jay Ziegler,
Good morning.
who'll be followed by Brian Johnson.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Good morning.
Hi.
Chris Schutz for the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance. I wonder if we could bring up the graph at the top of page 9 of the reply to comments. If not, it's shown here. Most of you have it. It's a bar graph that shows the relative amounts of flow proposed by the Tuolumne River Management Plan, existing flows, 20% and 40% of unimpaired February through June. This is the required flow. Today, you're being asked once again to delay adoption of the San Joaquin flow and South Delta salinity components of the Bay Delta Plan. Yet whether you act today or wait a month, a year, a decade, these bars in this graph are not going to get closer. What the districts and the city of San Francisco have proposed in the past and will continue to propose is not going to bridge the gap. The outcome for flows is not going to substantially change. The prospect for voluntary agreements has failed in the past because water users have never tried to make your framework for flows work for them. They've played all or nothing and time has run out. Resources and the Department of Fish and Wildlife have not pushed the water users to make your framework work for them. They have abandoned it. You heard Director Bonham say today, base flows and pulse flows. So what this looks to me like is 50 cents on the dollar, and you don't even have the amounts from the Delta Flow Criteria report, which would be half again as much as the blue bars on the graph, and which would bring it down to 33 cents on the dollar. We all agree that floodplain inundation is important. The question is, how much? Without water on the floodplain, it's simply new terrestrial habitat. We have a water budget. Again, the question is, how much? Your delay today will throw the work of the last 9 years out. It will undermine your staff, your science, and above all, the integrity of the Water Board as a regulatory agency. It will undermine your ability to act and adopt and implement the Sacramento and Bay Delta portions of the Bay Delta Plan. This has long since not been a science argument. It has become a political argument. And it's not just a question of letters from the governor or the lieutenant governor. It's also been interventions in this and related processes by senators, congresspeople, cabinet officials, and other folks in the federal administration. Please do not let politics overwhelm this board and its process. Trust your process. Please move to adopt today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Carlin, followed by Mr. Ziegler and Mr. Johnson. You're clipped together, so I'm not sure you both wish to speak, followed by Gary Bobker.
Morning. I think I touched the mic. I'm standing here today to support the postponement of your action today. And I say that with all due respect to your staff.
You've brought your own electromagnetic force.
I don't know what it is.
I mean, I know you're charming, Michael, but that's pretty impressive.
I don't know what it is.
Do you have like an Apple Watch or something? Or, yeah.
Don't text that.
What? It's my mic? Oh, it's me. I'm turning my...
So I stand here before you because we have been intimately involved in the negotiation process with the Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Department of Water Resources. And it has been very fruitful the past 2 months. We have been getting to yes. We have a couple of challenges still ahead of us. And that's why this time is actually necessary for us to work through those challenges. And we need to figure out how this voluntary settlement agreement actually fits into your plan. It's a little bit unknown right now because we don't know all the elements of voluntary settlement agreement. And we look at your plan and we want to see how they two fit together. But there are some elements that have been talked about today that I think are really important. Floodplain activation and restoration, part, it's part of something that we're looking at. Functional flows, another portion of what we're looking at. How do we use that water? Instead of just looking at a bar chart saying, hey, there's a big block of water, how do you actually parcel out that water to get the right flow at the right time to get the right biological response? And that's something that we're kind of looking at. I think one of the big things that we are also looking at is what is the revenue structure of a voluntary settlement? I think one of the things that has fallen down in the past is like there wasn't a guaranteed revenue structure to implement whatever is agreed to by the parties. And I will say that San Francisco is going to fund their fair share of any voluntary settlement agreement from now until we finish whatever time frame we have on that agreement. So I think it's important that you understand we're working very diligently. There are things that we still don't agree on, but I think we can get there in the next 35 days. I also say that we are reaching out to other parties that haven't been involved. We have been engaging them in discussions outside of the voluntary settlement agreement process in San Francisco to talk about other things that we need to do to improve our water supply reliability. What kind of projects are we going to start proposing to make more water available to our customers? And those are things that we are actively engaged in. So I stand here before you. I hope that you will pass the motion to postpone, and I'd be glad to answer any questions you might have.
When you say we, do you include folks in the environmental community, folks in the Delta, other people who want to engage?
Yes.
Because there's a lot of catch-up needed there.
Well,
as well as with us, which is hard with these confidential. I mean, there's a lot of guess. I hear peeks around the curtain from people, but all I get are moods and innuendo, which, as you know, is difficult for us because out in the public, you and others have to, or feel you have to, go low on flow. And it's alarming because we know we do need more flow. So having a real conversation about all the things flow does, including temperature and the rest of the San Joaquin River, is important. And I don't expect you to negotiate against yourself at a microphone, but I do worry that we have these warring worldviews and never the twain shall meet. In my view, the only way it happens is if people get in a room and actually listen to each other. And you happen to live somewhere where you've got everybody in the same arena. So I guess my expectations of you are higher than for others. I apologize for that.
I don't know whether I'm supposed to answer or...
Yeah. You could say thank you, but it's probably better to answer a little bit.
Well, I think for me personally, I will meet with anybody anytime to discuss, what we're trying to achieve here. Some people feel that we're not being intellectually honest at some points in time, or our science is flawed. And those are all legitimate, things that people feel they need to say, and I have to acknowledge that. But on the other hand, I will tend to talk to people like, how do we get to yes? How do we get to a solution that works for everybody? And everybody's going to have to give a little, and nobody's going to be satisfied in the end that I got the best deal possible. It's like we're all going to take a hit, if you want to look at it that way. And I think that we're getting to that point, and there still needs to be a little bit more give and take that has to occur. But I think that we can come up with something that is manageable, sustainable, fundable, going into the future.
I don't expect all of you to pledge allegiance to the board, but I would like it at some point. I won't make you do it here.
You made me do it in the past, so I think I'm covered.
All right, thanks. Mr. Ziegler.
Madam Chair, board members, I am Jay Ziegler with the Nature Conservancy. I am also here today on behalf of voluntary settlement participants from the NGO community, including American Rivers, Trout Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, Environmental Defense Fund, and Defenders of Wildlife. Collectively, our organizations want to be optimistic about a settlement agreement. We'd like to be hopeful, but our experience rather takes us to a place of great apprehension and fear about the delay of implementation on the Phase 1 FCD. I say that in recognition that together with Governor Brown, Governor-elect Newsom, frankly, all parties in this room today, our groups are strong believers in voluntary settlement agreements and the promise of achieving better, faster restoration outcomes, as well as broader ecological conservation and scientific understanding of what we're doing in the tributaries and what's happening in the Bay Delta ecosystem. Our experience, however, in the phase one negotiations leads us to be very apprehensive that necessary contributions can be put forward on behalf of the affected water interests in the absence of board action. Candidly, your action today in phase one, and it would be our hope that you take a vote on the phase one program of implementation that is before you, and condition that action upon implementation on December 12th, or a day after your next scheduled meeting. Unless the board changes the dynamic and puts a real impetus on the need for action in the next 35 days, we can't see a change that results in a voluntary settlement agreement that is correspondent, comparative, and frankly implementable by this board with the necessary enforcement authority behind that action. So it would be our hope today, and again, based on our experience, we are hopeful but concerned and worried that a dynamic in the negotiation has to change in order to produce a voluntary settlement agreement for the phase one SED that reflects the thoughtfulness of the board's order. And we would also recognize that this has been a deliberative process for the past 9 years, an inclusive process that has included all parties, different scientific perspectives. We may debate your board scientists, we may debate science findings of other parties, even our own. But the imperative in this moment, we believe, is for action. And that this board needs to put forward a phase one SED vote determination, condition that upon the ability or provide the ability and room for voluntary settlement participants to bring something back to you before December 11 that meets the objectives of the order that is before you. So we do thank you for your deep deliberative process and consideration of multiple perspectives. And we also understand the anxiousness in the room on both sides. But absence the imperative for action in a way that really changes the dynamic and helps us all get to yes, get to a meaningful additional flow component that can achieve the doubling objectives set forth 23 years ago. We cannot see this process succeeding on its own in the next 35 days. So thank you for your consideration.
I'm just going to read back the suggestion again for 7 people. Good morning. Thank you. My name is Brian Johnson, and I'm with Trout Unlimited and with Jay and the groups that he mentioned. And I will not repeat everything that he said because he was speaking for us, but I'm going to repeat the specific suggestion because it may have gone by quickly and people may have missed it. So we're requesting, and I'm reading from what we wrote, I apologize if it's a bit stilted, request that the board take action on phase one today, vote on the water quality control plan update and proposed program of implementation before you, would make the vote effective December 12th, unless the board votes at that time to incorporate in some way into the program of implementation a voluntary agreement presented to the board at that time. Thank you.
I have it on now, right? Mr. Bobker, followed by Ben Eichenberg from the Baykeeper, followed by Cindy Charles from Golden West Women Fly Fishers.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Gary Bobker, Program Director at the Bay Institute. We've been involved in these proceedings from the beginning. We've also been involved at various times in the voluntary settlement negotiations. There's no argument that negotiations between parties to achieve agreements should occur. And there's no argument really that if we're able to improve the physical landscape with large-scale floodplain restoration, that that's a good thing. And if that affects flow requirements to achieve the benefit of fish and wildlife beneficial uses, that's a good thing. That's not really in doubt. I mean, the question here is, what does it take to get that? What's the solution space? And the board science, the science of fish and wildlife agencies, and the science of my organization and many others with some pretty deep scientific skills has been to identify that with the current landscape, we need flows that are at what you've set as the ceiling of protection in your proposed flow range. We need to do that or better. If we do large-scale floodplain restoration, it's possible that we can drop down into the lower part of that range or the upper part of your range. And we all want to see that happen. But there is absolutely no scientific basis today to think that any combination of flow, floodplain, and other measures is going to result in a settlement which is scientifically defensible, which meets the beneficial uses thresholds, that is outside of the enormous solution space that you've identified in your 30 to 50% flow range. So you can send a message to the parties that are negotiating that says, go ahead, investigate things outside of this enormous solution space that we've identified in order to avoid litigation from those parties. But that's probably going to result in litigation by other parties, including probably some of the folks in that room. Or you can actually do something that I think will result in successful negotiations. I don't know, in 35 days or in 60 days or whatever. And that is to adopt today, because you have established an enormous solution space. And you need to send a message to these parties, make your proposed solution work in that solution space. So with all due respect to some of my colleagues, you don't need to bend over backwards and do little flips about what you're going to do on December 12th. Adopt today and send a message to these parties. Bring us a voluntary settlement that works within the enormous space we've given you. And if you can't do that, nothing you do is going to be successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Eichenberg, followed by Ms. Charles, followed by Thad Bettner from Glenn-Colusa Irrigation District. Hi.
So Madam Chair, board members, my name's Ben Eichenberg. I'm staff attorney for San Francisco Baykeeper. Thank you for your time and for your continued commitment against steadily mounting odds to achieving a final water quality control plan for the Bay Delta. I submit to you that we don't need more studies or negotiations to understand the Bay Delta's needs. The Bay Delta needs freshwater flow and therefore needs a water budget. As has been pointed out, without more water, the current ecological collapse we are witnessing will only accelerate. If we want more than an algae-choked monoculture in the Delta and a consequently drastically diminished San Francisco Bay, we need a plan that restores sufficient freshwater flows. Director Bonham referenced trust in public process. Public process requires trust, as he pointed out, and continual delays erode that trust. It has been nearly 2 years since the Natural Resource Agency's goal of voluntary agreements by December 31st, 2016 should have been met, but we have seen nothing. The other thing about trust I would remind the board of is the proverb, never trust to another what you should do yourself. California has entrusted this decision to the State Water Resources Control Board, not to Director Bonham, Director Nemeth, former Secretary Babbitt, the irrigation districts, or anyone else involved in the voluntary settlement agreements or involved in pressuring people involved in those agreements, such as senators and governors-elect. As has been As has been pointed out many times by this board and others, the current proposal is already a compromise position. 50% of unimpaired flow is what is needed. Moreover, flow standards should exist year-round, not just February through June, and standards should also include specific temperature requirements. Without a plan in place, there is little or no incentive for water users to compromise. We are unlikely to see such compromise absent strong action by this board. Voluntary agreements are still possible and far more likely after a decision on phase 1. Perhaps parties are claiming that settlement discussions will cease because they will be engaged in litigation. Well, I have every confidence that these parties can walk and chew gum at the same time. As you know, most litigation ends in settlement, and many of these parties have the resources to engage in settlement at the same time they are briefing their cases. And there is a risk that delay will weaken the board's position in that same litigation. It's even possible that weakening is the reason some parties are pushing for this delay. Regardless of any continuance, the board must reject any settlements that would provide less than the minimum flow specified in the proposed adaptive range, as all settlements must fulfill the salmon doubling objective. There is no scientific evidence, new or old, that any combination of flows below the adaptive range, even if combined with new habitat, will protect salmonids and other fish, wildlife, beneficial uses. We've been waiting more than 20 years for a plan that will provide a roadmap to recovery. It's time to make the tough choices and protect the public's rights and the public's resources. As you have said, this should be the board's highest priority. Thank you.
Yeah. Ms. Charles, followed by Mr. Bettner. And then Mr. Rubin, you're attached to Mr. Bettner. Do you want to speak too? Okay. I know these cards all came in to try and put them in a certain order, so just trying to be clear. Hi.
Hello, I'm Cindy Charles. I'm the conservation chair for the Golden West Women Fly Fishers. I fished the Tuolumne for years and have seen what has been lost. I actually don't fish the lower Tuolumne anymore, and the reason is because I don't want to stress out what little wild fish that are left there. I've been involved in issues on the river for years and haven't seen much fish recovery in spite of some habitat projects done here and there. I strongly believe the fish need higher flows. I feel you need to approve the plan today to move forward. The voluntary agreement talks can still go on. I'm skeptical of what is going on behind closed doors on that, but I believe that action needs to be taken today and no further delays. And if a voluntary agreement does appear and it includes all the necessary elements that the environmental groups have been asking for, then I'd be greatly happy. So that's pretty much all I would like to say today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bettner, followed by Rebecca Ackroyd from San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority, followed by Marianne Warmerdam from Rural Counties.
Good morning, Chairwoman Marcus and board members.
You got a band.
I do have, yeah, we have a gang here. I'm here representing over 25 water agencies that are currently involved in the phase 2 process. And as you know, there is a direct linkage to the actions that you take in phase 1 and how they affect phase 2. So while we're not directly engaged in phase 1 proceedings, we do have concerns about your process going forward, and particularly how we engage on the 2 tributaries and the Delta. So with that, we do have a letter that I'd like to submit to you, but I'd like to just go ahead and read that letter. And then if any of my members would like to make additional comments, if you have questions, we're here for that. So, dear members of the State Water Resources Control Board, the undersigned public water agencies that contract for Central Valley Project and the State Water Project urge the State Water Resources Control Board to delay the scheduled November 7th, 2018 vote to adopt both Phase 1 Water Quality Control Plan for the San Francisco, Sacramento, San Joaquin Delta Estuary and the final substitute environmental document. The United States Bureau of Reclamation and the California Department of Water Resources have been working diligently in making significant progress with the CVP and SWRCB public water agencies and other agencies on voluntary agreements. These agreements would allow for immediate improvements in the protection of water quality, substantial improvements in conditions for fish within the Bay Delta, a sustainable and collaborative governance structure, and secured funding for implementation. The agreements will be part of a comprehensive effort to improve water supply reliability in California and to further the protection, restoration, and enhancement of the Sacramento River and the San Joaquin River watersheds and Delta ecosystem. The State Water Board's adoption of the resolution and final SCD on November 7th would severely hinder the effort to reach voluntary agreements, which would implement important features that cannot at this time be included in the current staff recommendation. As such, to allow for the continuation of this historic effort, the undersigned entities respectfully request that the State Water Board defer action until its December 11th, 2018 meeting. And again, we have about 25 agencies that have signed this document that are subject to the confidentiality agreement. So again, I think we are working hard on a process, as both Director Bonham and Namath mentioned. We're working with them. A lot of time has been spent, evenings, weekends, to try and get to an agreement. We want to deliver that too. We believe it's a package that's best for the environment. Again, that will include robust funding, a governance structure that we believe we can immediately implement. I think that's true in phase one on the San Joaquin and on the Sacramento Bay Delta system as well. So that's our commitment. And again, we'd ask that you defer your action today. Thank you.
I know just a quick question, because I know you've worked with a lot of people. You've all spent a lot of time. I've just heard about the hours you've spent and only rumorous outlines of what it is you're talking about because of the confidentiality agreements. I am assuming that you, at some point, will be opening that tent, because even folks who have been in the confidentiality agreement are just now being brought in to conversations. And my fear that comes from some of this is that one set of players are going to come up with a deal and then dump it on our laps at the end. I have confidence that the governor is going to talk to everybody, because he's going to talk to everybody whether they're in a room or not.
Yeah,
once he gets in, he's going to get in.
Yeah, our understanding is the tent has been open. People have been invited, and it's their choice to come into the tent or not. I understand some have decided not to, but we believe we're still in the discussion of putting the program together. So we have ideas, plans, but those are not set in concrete. So I think as other folks get invited to tent, we're certainly willing to incorporate, their proposals, interests, questions, et cetera.
I would say you should be talking to people well outside the tent too, because we have to be talking to everybody, and that actually includes us.
Appreciate that. Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ackroyd, followed by Ms. Warmerdam, followed by Gail Delahan.
Thank you. Rebecca Ackroyd for the San Luis and Delta Mendota Water Authority. The Water Authority has provided extensive comments on the proposed Phase 1 amendments in SED in the past. Our comments have consistently raised concerns with the proposed approach to the amendments, and we believe that there is a better way. As the directors, Thad Bettner, and others have explained, the Bureau of Reclamation and DWR have been diligently working with a number of agencies on voluntary agreements. We believe these agreements, if finalized, would provide a better way for the Water Board to protect beneficial uses of water in the Bay Delta watershed. For that reason, the Water Authority echoes the request made by Governor Brown, Governor-elect Newsom, and others for the State Water Board to postpone action on the Phase 1 amendments in SED until the State Water Board's December meeting. Thank you.
Ms. Warmerdam.
Madam Chair, members, my name is Marianne Warmerdam. I'm a legislative advocate for rural counties, and we're here today to respectfully request your favorable consideration submitted by the governor and the governor-elect to postpone this particular consideration to December. As you know, the implications to our rural communities served by the tributaries of the San Joaquin as well as the Sacramento River have severe implications to their long-term economic well-being, and we believe it is warranted to take the time to consider the opportunities that VSAs hold forward and allow not only the regulated community but also all the stakeholders to come to an agreement that has long-lasting, sustainable opportunities for not only the state of California, the communities of the Central Valley, but also for the Bay Delta itself. Thank you.
Ms. Delahan, followed by Rachel Zwillinger from Defenders of Wildlife.
Hi, I'm Gail Delahunt. I'm with Western Growers Association. We're a statewide organization of growers who grow your fresh produce. And I'm here today to thank you for considering the governor and the governor-elect's request to postpone your vote. Just based on the conversation today and the testimony so far, it does, I think, warrant 30 days delay. It would be a travesty to have to spend a ton of money in court. So today we're here to ask you to please postpone your vote for 30 days.
Ms. Willinger?
Hi, I'm Rachel Zwillinger with Defenders of Wildlife. I first want to say I fully support the comments of my colleagues, Mr. Ziegler and Mr. Johnson today, in requesting action today with a deferred effective date until December. And I just want to add and underscore, and I think that all of my colleagues would agree, the importance of broadening the tent and making these negotiations and discussions inclusive. I think you've heard today and are fully aware that there are a broad range of stakeholders with deep expertise and unique perspectives that have a lot to offer. And it is my hope that we can come back in December with something that is truly supportive by a broad range of stakeholders and that can be durable in the long term.
All right. That concludes the number of people who wished to comment on the continuance item. I want to turn to my colleagues and ask if you want to do questions or, again, I think breaks are helpful, at least for me, because I'm listening to everybody. I need to go back and look at my notes, but I want to defer to my colleagues and what they might want to
I'm afraid we might have missed one commenter in particular, maybe others. I know Michael Franz
Did you want to speak?
Intended on speaking.
I'm sorry, I just missed it then. In terms of, did you, oh, it doesn't say continuance on it. Absolutely, you were towards the beginning. Sorry.
Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I already forgive you for getting my blue card.
Sorry, I was giving lots of directions there.
My name is Michael Franz, and I'm a Turlock Irrigation District Director. I'm a farmer from a little bitty town called Hickman, which is located on the Tuolumne River. Most of you know that I have been an advocate and a proponent for a voluntary settlement agreement for some time, as has my agency that I represent, Turlock ID. We have been a steadfast partner at the table under the leadership of Director Bonham. We're there because we believe that we can have ecosystem improvement while maintaining our community's water supply reliability. So I'm optimistic and grateful that Governor Brown and the governor-elect have weighed in on this, and I respectfully ask that you continue this vote until the upcoming meeting in December. With the governor's involvement, I'm confident that we can continue to move forward. I'll echo Director Bonham's comments that we have moved measurably in the last 60 days, and I think that's a good foreshadow as what we could potentially do in the next 35. So with that, I'll thank you very much.
Thank you. Are you open to broadening the tent as well?
No, I don't have to tell you how complicated the situation is in my own hometown.
Yeah,
We've got 5 water agencies as farmer agencies, plus the city and county of San Francisco. And so I have been focused primarily on continuing to get my constituency and keep them working in concert, in alignment. And I think that we're open to suggestions, but currently we're trying to be as productive as we can with the configuration we have.
Thank you. Are there, and he has a card. 2 more? All right. All right, no problem. Mr. Dreckmeyer.
So I just learned that District 10 was called for Josh Harder. Actually, I'm just kidding. I want to make sure everyone was awake. Sorry about that.
Until you just state your name and organization.
Peter Dreckmeyer with the Tuolumne River Trust. And I want to thank staff for a great response to oral communications from last meeting. I thought it was really helpful to clear up some of the misinformation out there, and there is a lot. I think you all heard that last week the San Francisco Board of Supervisors approved a resolution in support of moving forward. And there was a lot of back and forth that went into that. And going into the meeting, we thought we had an agreement that everyone was on board, that it asked for encouraging you to vote today and to encourage the continual exploration of voluntary settlement agreements. And the resolution was approved unanimously by the Board of Supervisors. A couple days later, the SFPUC changed their mind and encouraged the mayor to veto that. So that was very disappointing. But I think that is the right approach, that you move forward, you approve the plan today and allow the voluntary settlement agreements to proceed. The only reason you wouldn't go forward today is if you think somehow these ecosystems could survive with less than 30% unimpaired flow. That's a pretty low threshold, 30%. And if we can't work within those bounds, we being the water agencies, environmentalists, et cetera, we're not going to have healthy ecosystems. I mean, 30% is already very low. A lot of us have worked on this for years. A lot of you have been thinking about this for years. Board member Stephen Moore has been involved in this for years, and I believe this might be your last meeting, perhaps next week. I think Board member Moore should have the right to vote on an issue that he's put a lot of time and thought into, and we would like to have him weigh in. So it was mentioned earlier that we might have a record return of salmon this year. We're on course to have 3,500, maybe 4,000 salmon. As recently as 1944, we had 130,000. And that was after decades of mining, logging, ranching, dams on the river that cut off 85% of the habitat, non-native predators that were introduced in the late 1800s. So the big change, Don Pedro, new Don Pedro, 2 million acre feet. You had rim dams going in on the other rivers and cutting off the flow, the lifeblood of the Bay Delta. So really hope you'll take action today. Sometimes it's tough to be a leader, but you are a really phenomenal group, each one of you. And this will help the process. This will help jumpstart voluntary settlements. We haven't been engaged. I'm not super optimistic. I haven't seen movement from the other side. Already the 40% unimpaired flow is a real compromise, but we're willing to give it a chance, but within the parameters of the 30 to 50% range. So I hope you will take that to heart, and Board Member Moore, I hope you'll get a chance to weigh in on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Phil McMurray from Merced Irrigation District, followed by Teresa Hardy from the Sierra Club Water Committee, and Chris Shearing from the Farm Bureau.
Good afternoon, members of the board. I apologize, I missed the announcement in the process as well, so I do apologize for that. I'm Phil McMurray, I'm General Counsel with Merced Irrigation District, and I'm going to keep my comments very short and sweet and to the point, and just say that on behalf of Merced, we appreciate the letter from Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom yesterday asking that the board's decision be delayed, and we would appreciate this board's action to delay that vote as well. We have been very active in the negotiations, of course, and I'll just kind of reiterate what some folks before me have said, that there have been some very positive things said in the negotiations, but there is still a lot of work to do. But we are confident about that, and we feel strongly that a settlement really is the only way to make sure that all the interests involved, including the economy in our area, our senior water rights, and the salmon on the Merced are all protected. So I'll wrap up by saying thanks again to Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom for their pledge to be involved and for their support. And we obviously will be dedicated to working towards a settlement as well. Thank you.
Ms. Hardy. Hi.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Hardy. I attended the last public comment, and I sat next to a group of Native Americans, and I don't see them here today. It could be that they anticipated that you would make a decision, as well as some of the members of the Sierra Club who have also worked attended many FSPUC meetings, even at short notice, and who were here last time. It's been said today there's a give and the get. The give today is you need to go forward on your vote today. The get is yes, there can be transparency and continued input from a lot of people who still have, important contributions to make. But as Peter Dreichmeyer said, we need to set a parameter. That's today. We need to set that 30 to 50. We need to continue to listen to people. But another speaker also said that you have already created the solution space, and within that solution space, the voluntary settlements can continue to be explored. I just think what Native Americans have said since they owned this land and tended it and took care of it, rivers are our lifeblood, and you have to go back to that. And what is it that our rivers really need? They need water. You need to hold up to what you were going to do today. Yes, it's great that Governor Brown and incoming Governor Newsom will support it. That's wonderful news to hear, but let them support it on the parameters that so many people have worked on for so long, and believe in yourself and believe that you can make right decisions. Thank you.
Mr. Sheeran.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm very simple today. Chris Shearing from the Farm Bureau, and I'm just here to add the voice of the California Farm Bureau Federation in support of the continuance. The world is not a perfect place, but it's the best path for you today. Thank you.
Are there any more? Okay. I'm inclined to take a short break again, but question if other people would like to say something before the break or ask any questions. All right. Let's say 10 minutes just to look at notes, et cetera, and think about it. All right. Hello. All right, we are back at 12:24 p.m. And I want to open it up. I really do want to hear from my colleagues. It's obviously very difficult and interesting. And, well, that's all I'll say at the moment. So I'm really interested. I want to turn to Board Member Dodek.
Thank you, Chair Marcus. I have to admit I sort of exerted pressure and exercised my best privilege as I'm looking at Board Member Joaquin now as the longest serving board member at the moment, and actually perhaps of all time on this board.
You have the record, I think.
Yeah, definitely been here the last 10 plus years as we worked on this plan amendment. And even before that, in the 1990s, as a member of the board's Bay Delta team. And I will use the same word that Director Bonham used this morning in terms of the letter that we received from Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom. It is amazing. It is an amazing letter. And because words do matter, I read it very carefully, at least 10, 20 times by now, and really want to express my thanks to the governor and to the governor-elect for this letter for three main reasons. One, this to me indicate, well, we know that Governor Brown has always placed a high priority on water issues and on Bay Delta issues. And by signing on to this letter, Governor-elect Newsom has indicated the same. I think it is an amazing recognition, and it gives me a lot of comfort knowing that with the change in administration, there will still continue to be a great deal of priority placed on and commitment to resolving water and Delta issues. I think we've learned from the past 8 years at least that these are very complex problems that requires leadership not only from the board, but the governor and the entire administration, including those from the Resources Agency. Excuse me. So for that, I'm very grateful for this letter. And secondly, as Director Bonham pointed out, there are commitments and phrases in this letter that really reinforces and support what the board and the board staff has developed and proposed. Words such as improved stream flows and restoration, improved the ecosystem, the aquatic systems. And I think my favorite phrase of all in referring to the voluntary agreements, that it would meet the requirements of the amendment set forth for adoption, that those agreements would meet the requirements of the amendment set for adoption. I have not seen such stronger written language of support from the governor or from anybody, but from the governor and the incoming governor for the staff proposal that is before us today. So I am very grateful for that. And then finally, I am extremely humbly grateful for the way this is framed. Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom made this a request of this board. Yeah. It was not a direction, because this is a policy matter, not an adjudicatory matter. But it was a request made to us. And to me, that symbolizes both governors' recognition and respect for this board as an independent board of 5 members appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate, serving staggered fixed terms to ensure continuity, but also to ensure the diversity and perspective and experience that would come to bear for this board. While we as individuals, board members, may have different opinion, different perspective, and may not always agree, I've always felt, and I still do, that as a board, we together, through our deliberations and the transparency of those deliberations, make the best decisions possible, even though they may not always be ones that I strongly push for. So I think it was very heartening to see that reflected in the tone of the letter that was sent to us last night. The only thing that I would say disappointed me a little, actually a lot in this letter, is it seems to reflect what I've been hearing from many of the water users, water agency representatives, that somehow the idea that the board acting on this water quality control plan today would somehow negate any effort on voluntary settlement agreements. I cannot think of any time where we could, or any way we could have been more firm or strong in indicating our commitment to those agreements. I think we've each have individually voiced that commitment. We've directed staff, and staff has incorporated into the program of implementation a mechanism for incorporating any voluntary settlement agreements. And Director Bonham this morning used the term personal pledge. I will make you a personal pledge. I plan to be, all things God willing, serve out my term on this board at least through January 2021. And during that time, I welcome voluntary settlement agreements. The sooner the better. Within 35 days is great. And I commit to you that I will welcome those settlement agreements with open arms, with open hearts, with open minds. I want to hear them. I want to hear how they could help all of us achieve the outcomes that we want to. And we will act as quickly as possible to analyze and as appropriately to consider and include them in any future amendment. You have my personal pledge on that. I do not see why our moving ahead and establishing the requirements to which these negotiations, according to both governors, governor and governor-elect, would meet, somehow sabotage that effort. I think it does come down to a matter of trust. And some of you might recall a few years ago, I made this speech from my heart about trust and trusting some in the water community to do what's right during the drought, to do what's right for not only themselves, but their neighbors and for Californians. And it turned out that they did step up. They did do what was necessary. So today, my appeal to, I guess, my colleagues on the board is we need to trust in ourselves. We need to trust in our process. If we don't, how can we ask others to trust that process and to trust us? We have committed to reviewing, considering, and incorporating any voluntary settlement agreements that are appropriate, that meet the objectives to which we set. I make that a personal pledge, and I would encourage, and I believe you all support that, but I would strongly, strongly encourage us to take action today on the Water Quality Control Plan, but as always, reaffirm our commitment, our support for voluntary settlement agreements, and our very strong intention to receive them, whether it be in 35 days or whenever, and consider them appropriately and act appropriately. But I believe we need to indicate and to send that very strong and clear message that we trust in our process, that we trust in our words, that we trust in our actions, and that others must do the same.
Thank you. Others? Questions, fine. We're just talking here.
Well, good. One of the items that came up during the comments brought forward by the environmental perspective, but there's a broad range in that family, was the idea of proposing an effective date. That if we were to adopt the Water Quality Control Plan amendments today, there might be a mechanism to delay implementation in some form to allow the space for folks to come forward with a deadline baked into the action to encourage folks coming together. And then I presume then we would have the ability at that point, if we delayed the effective date, to actually, in a package in December, withdraw the adoption and adopt something in place, or commit, retain the adoption and commit to amending the plan consistent with the framework that's proposed in a timely manner. So my question is that a viable mechanism to consider today as
Yes,
an
it is.
adoption?
Of course, the motion currently before you is whether to postpone, but this is relevant to whether to postpone. The details of how we do it would be done later if you did not postpone. The plan does not take effect until approved by the Office of Administrative Law. So if you wanted to take that approach of making sure its effectiveness is delayed in order to allow a report back at the December 11th meeting, you could direct the staff not to submit the plan to Office of Administrative Law until, say, December 13th. Also direct that there be an agenda item on the December 11th board meeting to permit any necessary revisions to the plan, or to direct on still not submitting it at that point.
Well, it does factor into a decision to postpone, and it is relevant to, as I weigh the decision to postpone, what kind of mechanism could be in the offing to meet the spirit of encouraging voluntary settlement agreements, which I've always strongly supported, but recognizing motivation, incentive to come to the table. Folks indicated in their comments from the water user perspective that adoption would somehow hinder that process. That's mystifying to me, because the history of the State Water Board is the durable agreements have come after adoption, like the Yuba Accord everybody loves to talk about. So I'm mystified that somehow an adoption with these type of flexibilities built in would somehow hinder the ability of parties to come together to come up with an agreement to propose before this board, and this board could change the water quality control plan it adopts today or in December. Can someone explain to me how that would hinder people getting together?
Well, I guess that goes to me. So I was prepared to just make some comments about why I think we ought to postpone action. But if my colleagues are seriously considering moving forward with adoption today, then yes, I'll let you know what my sense is about why going forward is not advisable, aside from the fact that it would not, yes, we have a process that we need to respect. Everyone needs to respect our process. But we have a governor that has been actively engaged and is committing to being actively engaged. He's not going to be in office for much longer. And then we have an incoming governor that is committed to being actively engaged. And I absolutely respect their request and their leadership. They are advising or requesting us to delay. We're not involved in these confidential discussions that are underway. I don't know to what extent Governor Brown or Lieutenant Governor Newsom have been involved, but I have enough respect for their leadership to assume that they wouldn't send a letter lightheartedly. And they are telling us that this additional time could result in a productive discussion that would result in us actually receiving a VSA. And so for me, that's the goal. VSAs now, not at some point in the future. So of course, this has been the subject of a lot of discussion over the last several weeks. I actually was prepared to come here until we received that letter last night. As you know, I was preparing a series of amendments that I was planning on offering had we gone to adoption, or if we do, I would be doing that. But on the top of my list is that I was going to ask for and make a motion for a delay. And the reason I think that's so important is because there's important momentum underway right now. The parties are at the table. I don't know what sort of progress they've made, but we have all been told that they've been making progress. So if they started here and now they're here and they're telling us that they're making progress, shame on us not to give them a little more time. If they're saying that they can, within 30 days or whatever the time frame is, short time frame, close on that, then let's give them the opportunity. Now, knowing that these are very challenging, difficult negotiations, there's the how much water, how much habitat, how much money, and then there's the issue of enforceability, backstop, whatever you want to call it. Those are big issues. So I am concerned that even with progress, maybe they don't quite get there. Well, then I'm counting on the words in this letter. Governor Brown said he will be engaged and committed to this process, and Lieutenant Governor Newsom said that as well. And so I am just really excited about their commitment to engage, because in the event that they can't quite get there, I think that with their leadership, we stand the best shot at it. And for me also, the reason I posed the question of Directors Bonham and Nemeth about what else, you give to get, what's the get? We know what the get is on non-flow measures and funding, but it's an important get on time frame. These rivers are in my backyard. I've told many of you that before. They need restoration. They need additional functional flow. They need it now, 2019, 2020, whatever the date is. That's way better than going through a protracted litigation process and an eventual settlement. I wouldn't disagree with you, Board Member Moore, but it's an issue of when. And there is some urgency to act, but not just to act because of the process and because we have the authority to do so, but to act in a meaningful way where we actually get change on the ground.
To the youngster.
Yeah, I have a hard time knowing how best to contribute to this discussion in a way that brings us to success. And I think part of the problem is, what does a successful outcome look like? And we're trying to figure that out here. What I do want to point out is I think that this board has demonstrated an incredible amount of flexibility. We have an incredible amount of flexibility for the charges of inflexibility and otherwise an inability to want to look at the complexities of these watersheds and realize that it isn't just a flow component, but it is the many other stressors that we find ourselves with and needing to have a more sophisticated understanding. We have that flexibility. We've demonstrated in the past. And I believe wholeheartedly that moving forward, we would still have the flexibility to bring in a voluntary settlement agreement. That being said, we do find ourselves with a request from the current governor, the incoming governor, and it is a reasonable one, given the amount of time that has been put into all of this. But I share Board Member Diadamo's concern that 30 some odd days is a tall order. And do we set ourselves up for a situation in 30 days when people feel then past that date that a voluntary settlement is impossible? That the art of the possible disappears after this one Herculean moment, which is incredible, again, to have the attention of the governors. But I'm looking past 30 days to 60 days, past to the next year, to the next 5 years, to the next 10 years. And the question becomes, how do we set ourselves up for success, for communal success here? And so this is a difficult vote. It's a difficult moment. It's there's a lot of, again, I want to emphasize the incredible amount of flexibility the board has demonstrated that we continue to, and I join Board Member Dodek in saying that I commit to VSAs wholeheartedly, that I want them to be successful, that I want us to move past some of the really tired narratives that dominate so much of the discussions around how do we provide for our ecosystems. You know, folks continue to say that we've tried flows, you know, we've tried to account for more water in these ecosystems, and that's not the case. Everyone knows that the agreement in 1995 with the update of the Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan then was that the CVP and the State Water Project would by and large meet those water quality objectives, and we'd leave the tributaries, we'd leave the rest of this in massive watershed that takes up our state alone. And that compromise hasn't worked. And so it's time we get serious. It's time we all see ourselves. And you know, these are enormously complicated issues, but they're similar issues that other Western states face, that other regions in this world face when we talk about the constraints and the challenges faced with climate change, with a need to shift the way we manage our water resources. But if not California, if not this incredible group of people sitting here in this room that are committed to your communities, that are committed to being all here in 10, 20 years together, still yet, and enjoying hopefully a thriving ecosystem. And so, yeah, I'm challenged by the issues. I want to emphasize the flexibility we have, that we continue to have, that we embrace, you know, this other way, this generational shift. But we all have to be honest with ourselves as to what it is that is being proposed. And there needs to be transparency in the process, and there needs to be, you know, and that's, as Director Bonham said, I suppose that's our role in his faith in our processes thereafter. And again, looking beyond these next 30 days and realizing we do have an opportunity that it affords, in my opinion, a delay, although I agree wholeheartedly that we would still have the flexibility to adopt anything, even with moving forward. But I think that I want to respect the strong opinion of others that feel that somehow our vote would then stop all those discussions, which again, I don't agree in premise, but yeah.
All right. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Just a quick response. First of all, thank you, Board Member Diadamo. I know that we don't always agree, but I hope you know that I very much respect you and your contribution to the board, and in all the matters that come before us, you've helped us improve upon the action that we eventually take. And I'm sure that will apply here as well. I also want to also say, if I didn't make it clear, that I do very much respect the opinions and request that was made by Governor Brown and Governor-elect Newsom. And I appreciate that they and those who are involved in the negotiations are privileged to information that we do not have. And if all members participating in those negotiations had come to us in agreement with the request for delay, that would have been extremely persuasive to me. But not all parties did. We had a significant number of parties who are negotiating on those settlement agreements who came in and publicly asked us to move ahead. And so, again, not being party to what's going on, based on the experience that I've had, based on the history of the board's action and non-action when it comes to Bay Delta, mindful of the request being made by the governor and incoming governor, and very much appreciative of the fact that they made the request and left it to our discretion. That's my basis for asking that we move forward, but we move forward with a commitment to work with all parties, and should a settlement be proposed to us in December, we would welcome that, we will consider that, and we will take the appropriate next steps then. But I don't want another month or 2 months or 3 months of this question of the board, will the board act or not, be hanging out there. We need to demonstrate our commitment to this effort, and this effort includes voluntary settlement agreements. Let's just take that question off the table. Let's move forward and let's tell everyone we're serious about moving forward, not only with these objectives, but with the VSAs.
Board Member Dodek, what do you think about the effective date mechanism that was proposed?
I understand what Mr. Sawyer said, and should we get to that stage today, I do not oppose that. I would support that.
Right. I think this is, this word may seem too small, but it's big. One of the most interesting and challenging issues I've faced in a long time. I know for some people it seems simple, and I think everybody comes at it with their own narrative. And I look around the room and I can speak a lot of your narratives. It's almost like I could see the bubble over and that reality, and they're separate and they're in parallel, and they've been talking past each other for a very long time. And I think part of what we've been trying to do and say, and I really appreciate particularly Board Member Dodek, but everybody's thoughtful concerns, particularly how you read the letter and how you articulated the reality of what we've been proposing, but also the recognition, and I appreciate this as well, that we've been asked rather than told, or attempted to be told, that everybody has their own narrative on this. And I worry with a lot of fears that there may be people in the room who feel that delay is a win, and that somehow that means the board will never act, or that doesn't mean anything, or that folks who fear that, or hope that they do, or fear that that would be the case, and others who are actually believing that the engagement of the governor will make a difference to everybody being heard. And again, there are sort of fears and concerns. The narrative I know that many of us in the field have is of the board not being allowed to act, and that is, or being attempted to not act. And I'm actually not seeing this here. I think the challenge is I would prefer to act and have the governor's help in getting further on a voluntary settlement, because I think it is a request to put in 30 days of his prodigious skill. I don't know how much time. I appreciate the request from the incoming governor to caring about water is unusual, I have to say, historically, and I think is a good sign. I don't know how much time he'll personally have to engage. But I think coming in, if it's to help advance the ball, is something it's hard to say no to, but I do have this challenge of what happens in 30 days. And I have to say, it's very important, I think, for the reasons Board Member Dodek said, to act, because I do think there's room in what we've put out there to act within the range that we've talked about, that large range that Mr. Bobker talked about. There is always an opportunity for folks to come in with something different, but with support that we would then consider and go out and do a process in front of everybody on, and we've always been clear about that, but that there needs to be a process. I fear the people who think that delay means that the arguments they've been making will somehow magically be heard and our responses or our science or our concerns dismissed. I would disabuse them of that. And so I have as many fears as anyone else, and I probably have as much or more desire than anybody in this room to act on this over decades of both watching the board, having to stand in the place of the board when it failed to act, being saddened by the nature of the discourse, and frankly being a little frustrated at not knowing what's in that black box, and feeling that a lot of the issues of flow and other things that we know are important for a lot of reasons, including, I'll just say, temperature, for example, and an ecological approach that we've been seeking is important. I also think that our proposal in itself, in the noise of the miscommunication about it, whether the recent flurry of discussion about how legally we can't go lower than 40, which I think is completely wrong, but I think has a number of people in a twist, is unfortunate. Again, I think the discourse on this has been not surprising, but disappointing and not where we need to get. So I see all of those challenges, and I see the challenges of in 30 days, we're not going to have, there's no way to have something fully baked that would be able to have that regulatory backstop or whatever we want to call it. I'll call it a banana. I know people hate that, but we need to update this plan, and I appreciate and I believe that the governor understands that we need to update the plan. So I have all my fears from knowing people and fears about the worst case scenarios and my own desire in the narrative to be able to take this across the transom as someone who may well not be here very much longer. And I feel very, very strongly about a lot of that. But I do see with this historic and unusual request from a governor and a lieutenant governor asking for 30 days, it's very hard to say, no, don't give it a try to get us closer in 30 days. And I understand, and I think we're right, that there's plenty of room in what we've proposed, which I think people will write about this as a historic proposal, both in terms of its invitation to voluntary settlements and its ecological approach, et cetera. So I think I want to act today more than anyone else in the room, and I feel very comfortable with where we are. And I know everybody isn't. I think it's there, but I do think I am willing and actually welcome the attempt of the governor to try and get us a little bit closer to that in the way only he can and hasn't been engaged. And I have to have faith that he will also do it on behalf of fish and with respect to what we've done and give us the time and more people in the room the time to talk to, because I think he will talk to people outside of those rooms and should to get that bigger sense. And if you know him, you know he'll talk to anybody, anywhere, any time. And so I think a request to have 30 days, as much as I don't want to say yes to it because of how long this has been, that does have to do with my narrative and my tiredness and my concern and my fears. And I have to balance that with a request for 30 days on behalf of a historic request that does have more acknowledgement in it than preceding ones. Though it is very difficult for me to say, I think that request is reasonable, and I think it may get us to a closer and more inspiring place. If it's still where we are now, then we have to act, and then if folks want to litigate. Folks are going to litigate either way, but for me, the bottom line has got to be that we do have a plan adoption in December that's real, and I could have it be this one. I want it to be this one. I think it could work very well, but I have to keep my mind open to whatever comes in. But something not coming in or a request for more time does not work for me because time's up. Again, if the governor were asking for indefinite delay, I would say no. I think I don't want to do the 30 days, but I do think we should give the governor that chance to do what he's asking to do in recognition of both his respect for our ability and desire and need to do this work, but I also understand that he's coming into it more fresh. So what seems obvious to those of us who have been in here about what we've been proposing all along and the room for it is perhaps a tactical discussion. I think it could absolutely help to have us adopt. I think it could absolutely, we could go forward, but I understand his desire to just be able to have his 30 days to have at it and then let us do what we want to do with his blessing. And so in what has been a very hard day or two of mulling it over, while I'm not happy about where we are. On the one hand, I am happy to have the engagement and a desire to give it the college try to at least get us closer maybe to articulating a vision that can get us off the warring narratives and factions. And I will say, to the extent that people don't move off their narratives and continue to both mischaracterize what we've proposed, or I think not be open and I think honest in their assessment of the need for water for fish, et cetera, I just say I will come back with even more vigor and determination in December. And I don't make this decision lightly. I make it out of respect for the man and both men and the offices, but also with respect that it is a request and that it is a very short request, and that I find it hard to say no to, though another part of me would like to. And I know that will confuse some people. I've agonized over it a lot, but you have to step back and say, in the bigger picture, when you have a governor and an incoming governor just asking for a short delay to get into it and give it a go, I want to give them the chance to bring everybody together a little better, but it has to be people who are inside that tent. One thing, not all of whom have been brought in as much as others, but also people outside the tent. And I do have commitment for that, as well as more of our team and our staff and an understanding of what we've actually proposed, which I think the governor is also new to, and I appreciate his respect for our role and what it is we have to do. So I find it hard to say no to a short delay, as much as it makes my heart sink with fear and worry. The upside is we get closer to a better comprehension, which moves us, even if we then have to go forward, to a better place to move on to the forward to the VSAs we've asked for. Because I do think that we, as I said when we opened, we have to change the channel on how we do this. The water wars and the vitriol and the talkers have to give way to the people on the ground who want to do things. And there are people out there who want to do things, but the prevailing dynamic makes it hard for them to do it. And I'm hoping the governor can help change that a little, because otherwise people don't want to negotiate against themselves or even recognize the fact that we've already come out with a pretty fair proposal. So again, probably too many words and too much of my feelings as opposed to just short decision. I find this very hard, and anyone who thinks it's simple isn't thinking through the layers of it. And so I just think, on balance, I want to be appreciative of this letter, the request and the offer, for all the reasons that Board Member Dodek said. And so reluctantly, I will, but with hope, I will support giving it a try, but with my eyes wide open and a firm commitment to act in December.
I think this is time for you to call the vote.
I want to just sit here in a moment of silent marination and reflection. Yep, this is one of those things where I need that poster that said, "I want to believe," and I do. I want to believe. And thank you. Oddly enough, much of what you said, even though it differs from what you asked, has helped me with this. So I call on the better angels of everyone's nature and see what happens. If it's more of the same, then we will have wasted 30 days of ours, yours, and the governor's time. If it is appreciably different and moves the dialogue, we'll at least be closer to a vision of what could be.
Well, yeah, and as I mentioned before, I did have a discussion with the governor, and I would just distill it down to this. He says, give me a chance. Give me 30 days. You know, recognizing that I won't be here in 30 days. Very respectful to me. Always a request, not a direction. So it means a lot to me personally, in my relationship with him. And I would honor that. And also the fact that he has my phone number. I'll still have a beating heart and a pulse after I'm off the board, and I offer myself up to the governor to be able to bounce back ideas as he mulls over these details.
Hey, you can be in the tent now.
And just for the record, in case anyone thinks that I'm dissing the governor did
fabulous.
not call me. But also, given the tremendous respect I have for the chair in regards to her statement and her support for continuance, I will abstain from voting on this item. My philosophy always is if I cannot support the governor and my chair, I will abstain.
Well, with that, do I have a motion?
You have a motion.
And do I, right? I'm just going, and do I have a second?
Second the motion.
Any further discussion? All right, this item will come back on December 11th. And in the meantime, I do expect a lot of work.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear a vote.
We have to say it, all in favor?
I will abstain as well.
All right. Favor?
Aye.
All right, aye. So the motion carries, and we will be back December 11th, hoping to have something very different in front of us. I need, no closed session, and the meeting is adjourned.